Welcome to LinkedIn Live with personal brand authority, Lida Citroen. Lida is an award-winning executive coach, speaker, and author working with clients in over 30 countries. She helps professionals, entrepreneurs, and business leaders manage the way they're perceived by the people who matter most. From leadership development, executive presence, to strategic communications and social media positioning, Lida's work is thoughtful, motivating, and practical. Get ready for a great program. Here's Lida.
Hello, friends. How are you today? I am calling you and dialing in today from chilly but beautiful Denver, Colorado, where fall is in full swing. If you've been in my programs before, you know one of the things I love to ask you at the outset is to please put in the chat where you're dialing in from, and maybe add what the temperatures are, because I think we're all over the world, those of you who are joining, and I would love to know, is it warm where you are? Is it chilly and cold like it is here in Colorado in the United States? Or what are you experiencing? So as I kick off our program, go ahead and let us know in the chat where in the world you're joining us from today. Today, we've got an interesting program because we're talking about the idea of executive presence, but I'm going to put a spin on it. And our guest is going to help me build that out. Because when we think of executive presence, what typically comes to mind? The term has been used for many, many years. It's very well part of our natural language, but it kind of implies leadership. Right? So we think of somebody having executive presence as somebody who is in a leadership position. It also brings up ideas of gravitas, right? Charisma, character traits that maybe we have or we don't have. But how does that relate to us? I actually went to a recent Harvard Business Review article, and when they talked about influence and executive presence, they used words that still in 2023 surprised me. They talked about executive presence and influence being power and authority and control, which made me think, what if you don't want that? What if you want to have presence? What if you want to have influence? But what if you aren't an executive? What if you don't want to lead other people? You just want to know that when you raise your hand in a meeting or you have something to contribute to an idea or a cause, that your voice is respected and heard. What if previously your voice has been underrepresented or even marginalized? How does executive presence serve you? So that was the big question I was wrestling with as we were preparing for this program. And I started thinking back to the last 15 or so years, right? Our world has changed. The impact of social media. Everybody has a voice now. What did COVID do to our ability to communicate influence and to have presence? The globalization of our work. I did a program last week for thousands of people in India from Denver, Colorado. Like, all of a sudden our work is global. How has that influenced our ability to have presence? So many ways that we communicate, from video calls to IM and DM and chat and forums and Slack. We're speaking differently. So how does that impact traditional models of executive presence? And the same can be said that our need for influence and what we're drawn to in influence is also changing. Do you need to have a fancy suit, the corner office, and a title of authority to command presence today? Well, many of you know that I'm about to finish my next book, and the book is called The 10 New Rules. Well, The New Rules of Influence. There's 10. I just gave it away. The New Rules of Influence. And in that book, I really unpack what I believe is needed to go forward to have influence with the people you want to serve. Whether it's in a meeting or it's in a movement, how do you get your voice heard? How do you become more visible and branded and credible and consistent, as well as inclusive and generous in how you serve people? So I'm actually seeing this shift. That's what I'm so excited about with this book. And that's why I'm so excited for our conversation, because we're going to talk about some of these ideas and especially how they've applied to my guests' career thus far. So thank you for putting in the chat. Oh, we've got somebody from Colorado. Hi, Scott. We've got Jacob. I'm sorry, 17 degrees in central Wisconsin. We've got the UK, Nairobi. Okay, Maryland. Ooh, Canada has snow. Fancy that. So do we in Colorado. Keep putting in the chat where you're dialing in from. I love that part. But I want to bring my next guest up for you because you are going to love hearing from him. Bobby Thompson is Director of Operations at Beezer Homes. He's an Army combat veteran and a construction professional with over 20 years of leadership experience. Bobby has invested his entire career in sharpening his technical and leadership skills. He knows a thing or two about presence. Working in the building industry trades and leadership roles, he's a sought after speaker on topics of leadership, workforce development, and team cultivation. He was recently a keynote speaker at the National Association of Home Builders Student Leadership event, and he contributed to a panel discussion for Vet Indexes in New York City, where I got to moderate the panel. That's where I actually met Bobby. So welcome to the program. You've got some fans in the chat.
It's exciting to see, and thank you for having me, Lida. It's a phenomenal to work with you again.
Well, it's always a pleasure. And I know this topic means a lot to you. It means a lot to me. So let's jump in. When you think about a career that you've had thus far, from the Army into corporate, how did you get through that? What were some of the keys to your success? Tell us your story.
Well, it's interesting, right? And it's one that's not unique. Transitioning from a military life to a civilian life is a pretty windy road for many of the service members that are doing it now. And I can tell you that one of the things that assisted me in making that transition and how I got to where I am is just what we're talking about today. Having, in the military, they reference it as command authority. It's the same as executive presence if you really look at some of the same traits. And being able to do that consistently throughout my entire career, whether it be in home building or in my Army background, has led me to where I am today. And that's continuing to progress forward. And I think we're going to talk about a good bit of it in our discussion today, but really making my way from a construction manager after my military career and growing to an executive level at a national home builder. That's how I've navigated command authority or executive presence and influence.
And I love how you draw the parallel, because I think, command authority works in the culture of the military because the military has a very different structure. When we think about how would command authority work in the private sector, it really does model almost that Mad Men era, physical style, but also communication style. And those of you who are hanging on every word, make sure you put your questions in the chat because we're going to have time at the end for questions for Bobby. What are your thoughts to my need to challenge the term executive presence and the way I kind of framed it up?
Oh, I think it's relevant to the day, like you referenced, right? And the world that we live in today is one of influence. And I think that executive presence is a cultivated culture. I don't think it has anything to do with the gravitas or as you referenced, the Mad Men pursuit of, iron fist wielding command. More so, it's done through and cultivated through servant leadership. And really, the individuals that you are around, the networks that you build, everyone understands how you make them feel and how helpful you are. And that's what makes them want to listen to the words that you have to say and be guided by the efforts that you're doing, whether it's serving upwards or managing upwards or working on a collective collaborative team. It's the same. Everyone benefits from helpfulness.
Well, and one of the messages that I share in the book that I've become really passionate about is the idea of inclusivity, making sure that all voices are represented. Doesn't mean we're going towards consensus, but if voices aren't represented, we don't have the whole picture and people don't feel that sense of buy-in. Do you want to comment on that?
I agree wholeheartedly. I think that there's another level to that. and those allies there, and being a staunch ally to several underrepresented and underserved groups, I can tell you that when you're in a room and you're the individual that can speak for those voices and make sure that those voices are heard, you have a fiduciary responsibility to do so, and make sure that their voice is included. And one of the best ways to do that is to make sure that you understand what that voice is and not what you think it is. And that goes to that exploration of asking fact-finding questions. You know, what are your pain points is the easiest question that you can find out the pulse of any group.
Well, and then really listening. So I love that you just mentioned that, because in the book, I have a client who is a master at that. I mean, she has represented a community she doesn't come from, and she did a lot of the things you just talked about. She really listened, but then it wasn't just hearing it, it was showing action, right? So she could
Right.
say, I'm with you, I believe in you, I want to represent you, but the action has to be there. And then continually going back and listening and checking in. I think the beauty in that, the elegance in that, is that we don't have to come from the community that we're passionate about serving.
That's correct. And I can tell you that when you get embedded in these
Oh,
groups and in these communities, it should shape, it hopefully will shape the way that you synthesize information, because you no longer will look at it only from your perspective. Hopefully, you strengthen the muscle to be able to listen actively and then synthesize it based on all the many voices and walks of life, and different perspectives that you've had exposure to. That's the benefit of diversity and inclusion, is that it will expand not only the opportunity, but also the individual and make them a more well-rounded performer.
exactly. Obviously, coming out of the military, we know that service is a big part of your DNA. And we know that somebody coming out of the military doesn't leave service behind once you take off the uniform. How are you still serving now that you're in an executive role in your community, in your company? What are some ways service shows up for you?
Service shows up every time I put a pair of shoes on. It doesn't matter whether or not they're boots or Oxfords or flip flops. It's leaving wherever you are better than the way you found it,
Hmm.
right? And that's true service, and that echoes in my current industry, where we've done some great work, both militarily in that community, but also in the minority group. Beezer Homes will be in Maryland, will be participating in the minority outreach event here in the month of December, to make sure that we are connecting with underserved and underrepresented businesses, small businesses, to make sure that we are acting diverse and inclusive as we can, and make sure that there's a place, there's a sense of belonging that Beezer Homes specifically has, that we want to make sure that everyone feels that they belong and that their voice is heard and that their perspective is seen. And so that stance that the company that I work for currently has, I've had my entire life through my entire career. And I do that through community service, whether it be at Prince George's County, doing Christmas in April, or many of the other events that we do and that we host.
What's Christmas in April? You got me
Christmas.
curious.
Oh no, it's good. It's a phenomenal program, and here in Prince George's County in Maryland, that assists homeowners that need, whether it be a renovation, leave, clean out of their gutters, some sort of benefit to their home, to their residents that they may not be able to afford or perform for themselves. And then the community bands together to perform that act for them. Home Builders Cares is another wonderful program through the Maryland Building Industry Association here in Maryland, and that helps. The same thing. It's one of those things that if you're not able to do it yourself, there are tons of foundations and programs out there that will assist. And I've benefited in my career from being a part of those programs and being able to help where I can and connect the individuals that can help further.
Do you feel that that level of community involvement has elevated your stature, let's say, within the company and within the industry? Has it given you actual credibility?
I think it goes hand in hand, like we were talking about earlier, as I stated earlier, when you help, there's a twofold benefit. One, you're improving the relationship that of the person that you're helping or the community that you're helping. Absolutely. And there's a selfless piece of a benefit to you. And you shouldn't be helping just for the sole transaction of getting something in return. You should genuinely be helping because you know it's the right thing to do. And I do think that karmatically, right, that it pays off dividends. And I can say wholeheartedly that when you are continuously positive and you bring a positive light to rooms, that energy that you bring, right, the right energy and the right words always equals explosive growth. So if you always have the right actions and you always have the right words, and you are making sure that what you want to bring is a positive improvement always, it will come back to you in return.
And when you say always, right, those absolutes that I like jump on, but I think there's also an element of vulnerability and realness because we do make mistakes and we do miss deadlines and forget to deliver on a promise. And how does that play into executive presence and then our ability to be influential and have influence?
That's great. And I would reference bringing your whole self to work, right?
Mhm.
And that's how you can be authentic and creating a culture that not only you, but your team members, your subordinates, whatever, however you like to refer to them, everyone feels comfortable bringing their whole self to work because we are human. That's the
Right.
one thing we all have in common, right? So the commonality piece of it is that you want to look for common ground that at the base level, we're all human. We're all living a human experience. So if you look at it that way and you try and be vulnerable, as you're saying, and share when you do mess up, because it's just a matter of time, right? To err is human. So you will eventually have a mistake or an error in owning it and welcome that radical candor for everyone within your group or within, if you're a speaker, within the audience that you're speaking with, goes a long way because it means that you're willing to meet them where they are because we are all works in progress. And if you yourself are a work in progress and you're opening doors for others in that regard, they're going to relate to you more than they would if you came in and you tried to do just pure command. It's not going to land the same way.
Well, and when you talk about command and we think about things like authority and power and that old era of presence and the red power tie and how we had to show up, and it was almost not a facade, but it was like a costume, right?
Mhm.
And being real does mean owning your mistakes. I made a mistake recently and I had the option of saying, to myself, oopsie, let's just make the edit, or going public and saying, I made a mistake. I shared something I was excited about and I said, ladies and gentlemen, we have, a cover to my book. Well, that's not very inclusive because what if somebody, doesn't identify as female or male? So I went back and I edited and I said, friends, we have a cover to my book. And I made a note that I made a mistake. I believe in inclusivity and I own that mistake. But where's the balance between being too authentic, too transparent, and owning your mistakes, right? Because I could have just
Sure.
changed the word at the beginning of the post and people probably wouldn't have noticed. So, where's that balance in your mind?
Well, it's case by case, the
Okay.
balance, but I think authentically is when you make an oops, right? That's what we're talking about. When you make an oops and you can understand where that could be off-putting, it's not that you changed it that made the difference, is that you acknowledged that there was a change that was necessary because
Mhm.
there's going to be growth from you making that post and then updating it and then stating the update. Someone may have noticed in their recent communication that or meeting that they're saying guys or something like that. It's
Right.
a common mistake, right? And it's not very inclusive when you're referring to a group. So there may have been a teachable moment there.
Mm.
So it echoes, it ripples effect beyond that one. So the balance, I think, is when you can make sure that not just you, but everyone around you benefits from that ownership, that's when 100% it needs to be out on Front Street, and it needs to be shared and say, hey, you know what? I made a foul, and this is how I'm correcting it. And I welcome you to do the same.
I say I flag on the play, right?
Right.
One of the things you and I talked about as we were getting ready for this is you talked about serving the next level in your career.
Mm.
As an executive who's grown obviously out of the military into the early ranks of your, corporate career and now the executive level, what does that mean? And can you explain it further?
Yes, and it's kind of one of those interesting things that has benefited me both in my military career and out. And I can tell you, if you find out what is missing, right? You find out what's important to my boss is important to me type of stance, right? So if you find out, for an example, a true story in my construction career, I was a construction manager, and my customer care department for my division was getting off the ground, and there was a need there, and I excelled at customer service side of our business. And so I'm speaking to my one of my very first mentors and sponsors. He suggested me for a role within that department, and I excelled at it, and that truly became that sharp trajectory, that growth trajectory of my career, because I found the missing component that would make the division more successful. And I excelled at it. I made sure that I excelled at it, and I made sure that I brought others with me when I did excel at it. And so as a department, we grew. And then as a region, we grew within that customer care department. And then I outgrew the role and then moved on. And that's continued to be I would say, my stance, my take on find out what is missing, find out how you can help, and then help with all your gusto.
You're kind of talking like be an entrepreneur of your own career, right?
100%.
You own your career like a business. I mean, I think about the things you were talking about, and I do that for my business, but you're almost saying, let's think about our careers as entrepreneurs.
I would say that part of your part of influence, part of your brand is a business. Every time you go out into the world, you are representing you as a business. Uh, when you walk in, it does matter if your energy is a bad energy. You're not going to attract opportunity and attract networking, establishing a great network if your energy is trash. No one wants to be around that. But if you are exuding the best, highest pursuit of self that you can, and what you want to be in your mind's eye, and that's what you put out into the world day after day, consistently, it will give you positive results.
And still be authentic, because we all have those bad days, right? And being able to share that and actually builds your humanity. So we're not talking
Absolutely.
about absolutes. And I love that, because we're not talking about you always have to be, upbeat and, a cheerleader, because we're going to have those days when we don't feel that. But you've got to stay authentic. You also have to stay appropriate. I mean, it's a lot we're asking of people.
Right, but that's in the world that we live in today, where everyone has this sense of perfection, right? Social media has up 100% put everyone into this thought pattern that it has to be perfect all day, all the time. But authentically, if you're coming out and say your energy is a bit off, but you're owning it and you're saying, hey, you know what? I've had a crummy couple of weeks, and this is how I'm overcoming it. It's inspirational to those that may have that same circumstance happening in their life, because you never know who's wearing the mask. And I think the costume that you referenced in the old guard of executive presence, right? There was a lot of mask wearing, but when you take off that mask and you are truly authentic and you say, hey, you know what, we've had a bad quarter, but this is how we're going to bounce back, or this is the industry that we're in, and this industry is under fire or having a bad time, and then you're charting a path and you're showing authentically how you are overcoming that. There's something to be said about perpetual optimism being a force multiplier. That's Colin Powell. That's not me, though.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, definitely want to revisit that because you're right. I mean, there's enough doom and gloom in the world, but if we're leaders, or even if we're in a position in our organization where we want to make a difference, right? Because I don't think everybody wants to be a leader, and I think that's fine. We need
Right.
people who are going to follow as well as lead. But to know that your voice matters, to know that when you have an idea or you want to share a thought or a challenge, right? The emperor has no clothes. You want to be
Yeah,
able to make sure that there's some credibility to that.
100%. And I would say that for the individuals that don't want to lead, they don't want to become a leader, you're
Right.
still going to run your business. And if your business is your brand, you yourself, how you are portrayed and how you can gain influence within whatever role you want to be, then you take that ownership. And it takes a lot of, I would say, internal investigation for yourself, because that's when you find out who you truly are. And that introspective will help you grow that person to your highest self. And everyone should do that, whether you want to be a leader or not, because your whole life, not just your career, will benefit from it.
Yeah. In the book, I talk about self awareness. And I say, when you ask, if I ask an audience, how many people think they're self aware, most hands go up. How many people
Right.
are truly self aware? Those are fewer hands. And admittedly, it's something we have to continually work on because influence isn't a destination. It isn't a thing you get, right? So I even draw a differentiation between being a person of influence and having influence. Having influence means if I raise my hand in a meeting, people aren't just going to look past me. If I have an idea, I can share it with confidence and clarity. Being a person of influence is, it's rare. It's those people that when they speak, crowds listen, and maybe not even people who know them. So there are some nuances here, but I think when I look at the people who are joining and paying attention today, what we all want to know is that we matter, right? And that there's a place in
Yes.
the world for us. The world has gotten smaller. So, one of the things I'd love to talk about for a moment is the fact that we're working and we're building influence in cultures that we may have no connection to. I do work in West Africa, in the UK, in Australia, India, Israel. I have a big client in Israel. I mean, these are cultures that I don't come from or connect with. So, what are some of your suggestions? I know this is a little bit of a left field question, but what are some of your ideas or suggestions on how we can become influential or
Mm.
have presence with people who come from countries or cultures that we don't understand or we don't know?
That's a great question. I would tell you that the first is to explore. And before you do anything, whether it be a different culture, a different personality type, uh, is explore, right? And get rid of those preconceived, those unspoken assumptions. So when you are bumped into something that you don't fully understand, you're going to have to explore. You're going to have to do the fact finding questions, the whys, dig deep, get all the way deep in the whys. Why do you do this? Why? What makes you make that decision? And
Mhm.
start to pull that thread. And once you understand that community, then you can be helpful to that community. Because if you're just going with your cue cards, and this goes for everyone, not just speakers, right? If you're going with what you think people want to hear, instead of exploring first to find out how you can make an impact, then there's a high probability that you're going to miss.
Right.
But if you actually explore and you understand what will be of benefit to the group based on their own responses, then that's going to land differently, right? The people are going to understand how you made them feel and how you helped. And if you answered a question or solved a problem for someone, it's going to be much more memorable. And that consistency is how you build influence within that community, because now they know that you've grown a value added perspective. So when you do raise your hand, like you're saying, they know that what you're about to say, you're not saying it just to take up space of time. You're raising your hand to be value added. And I think that's a culture and that's a muscle, right? To be able to grow. That every time that you're speaking, it's value added in some way, shape, or form, that it's not just for weighing in because it's popular to weigh in.
Or because you feel like I just need to say something. So I'm just going to say, yeah, what he said, I think the same thing. I think it was June, we did a program. I think it was also on executive presence and women in leadership, a LinkedIn learning. And I'm sure Sabrina is on my YouTube channel right now trying to find it. She'll post it in the chat. But I had a guest, Whitney Hake, who talked about, going into every meeting with an idea. She said, never go into a meeting with nothing to say. Always go in with an idea. And if somebody shares that idea, one way you can have influence, to what we were just talking about, is to build on it, right? So not just say, well, I was going to say the same thing, or what he said, because then your voice is heard, but you're not really contributing like you said. But how can you build on that idea? How can you share a different perspective? From where I sit, this is what I would add to that. I know Sabrina will put the link to that LinkedIn Live in the chat in just a moment. But, what are some techniques that maybe you used as you would go into these conversations? You were from the outside when you came in there. We have it. She put it in the chat. When you were coming out of the military, getting your feet wet, so to speak, in the construction industry, what were some ways that you made sure you were always contributing and building that influence in the early parts of your career?
So for all of my military service members, one of the soft skills that will always provide guidance for you is mission first, right? So that mission first mindset, that never fail, can't quit attitude is what will propel you. And that's what I've used throughout my career, specifically in the beginning, because it's the what else can I do? The yes and portion of it, right? So yes, someone comes up with a great idea or mentions a great idea. What else can we do? And then you add on value added content. It's not just yes and you're pulling, grasping at straws. It's to make sure that you've been thinking about what else can we do that makes the mission. What else can we do to be better as a group? And that continuous improvement culture, that if you're cultivating that within your sphere of influence, whether it be just your small team or even just you and a buddy, however you're doing it, that sphere of influence will benefit from yes and continuous improvement.
Do you think executive presence, do you think influence comes with rank in the private sector and outside of the military? Does it come with rank?
I think innately people think it does, right? But I'm sure that everyone that's on the meeting today or in the event today, and those watching the recording will attest that you've always bumped into someone that is in a leadership role that they shouldn't be in. And it's because, and that unfortunately has held true everywhere. But there's going to be individuals that think that they are leaders. And they're not really leaders, they're just titles. Leaders genuinely care about the organizational health, genuinely care about the people, and are growing, always continuously growing them and the people around them. And I think that's the difference between having leadership, executive presence, or just a title. Because there are definitely individuals out there in the world that through tenure, through circumstance, became a higher level of employment, whether it be an executive title or not, but they didn't do the day-to-day work, right? The development of the individual. So that way it's not a house of cards. They've been growing the succession plan as they go along, right? And those are the best leaders, because you can count on them to just improve everywhere that they are, and in effect improve an organization. And that's the greatest impact and the influence, is that you're not just a one-off, you're growing more. It becomes infectious in a way, that you're growing better leaders around you. And that's executive presence.
I love that. How do you stay grounded? How do you stay authentic in who you are? I mean, you've got an important job, you're doing a lot of things. How do you stay grounded and authentic in who you are while still being agile and flexible?
I think that introspective, right, that know thyself piece of it plays a key role, because trust me, my road is a very windy road, and there's been failures. It's learning from those mistakes, learning from those failures, that's how I've stayed grounded for me. And I have a lovely wife that holds a mirror to me, and she is my bedrock. She is my sounding board. I think finding, if you don't have that person in your life, and it doesn't have to be a significant other, it can be a friend, it can be a day one friend, right, to keep you grounded on where you came from, or it can be a mentor or a sponsor that's able to ask you the hard questions and challenge you to be better. Whoever that is in your life, there's several people that you need to be successful in your sphere of influence. And I think someone that holds a mirror to you is a pivotal piece of that. And that's, for me, that's what's kept me grounded.
I love that. And I know that some of you are putting questions in the chat. We're going to get to those in just a moment. And Bobby's going to answer all your questions. So keep doing that. Talk to me a little bit about mentorship, because you mentioned having a mentor or a sponsor. How do you define the difference, and how have mentors and sponsors and allies played roles in your career?
That's a great question. So there's definitely a difference between mentorship and sponsorship, right? And so a mentor, and if you don't have a mentor, highly recommend you get one. And it's several. It's not just a one-off, right? But you definitely want to identify someone who is where you want to be, because that's going to be your azimuth, your North Star of sorts, right? To be able to lay out a plan or a path. This is how they got to where they are. And that path or that plan might not work for you, but it will give you a starting point, right? It'll give you some reference points, some waypoints that you might want to approach. And so for me, mentorship, in my opinion, is someone who takes an active role in your career or in your life and provides guidance for you to excel and where you are. And they kind of guide you along the way, right? A sponsor puts opportunity in front of you. So a mentor provides the way, but the what is provided by a sponsor. And I've been very beneficial and privileged in my career to have had several wonderful sponsors and mentors. And what they have done, and what the challenge is, right, is that you pay it forward. Is that when you are mentored, you find others to mentor, right? And you know something really well when you can teach it. So when you get to that point that you feel that because there will never be a right time to do anything, you put yourself out there and mentor others while being mentored. We should all have this nice daisy chain of sorts of mentorship. And then when you get into an opportunity where you can open a door for someone, or as an ally, sponsor someone within an opportunity, a room, an event that they otherwise would not have had the opportunity to do or be a part of, you owe it to yourself, your future self, and those people that don't have the access to do it. And it will benefit not only you, because it will come back around. That influence grows along with when you're helping those people get to where they're trying to be.
So here's a question for you. If you've been a mentee, right, you've had wonderful mentors. The question is, how do you make that shift into being a mentor? But similarly, if you've been a mentor, how do you become a mentee? And I'm asking the question a little bit selfishly, because I have mentored a lot of people throughout my career. I do a lot of mentoring through Veterati for military veterans. I think I'm at almost 400 people I've mentored. But how does someone who's known as a mentor go and find a mentor? And how does someone who's been a mentee jump up? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So I'm confusing myself.
So if you think of it like this, right? If we're all on this escalator, right? And there's always going to be someone who has figured it out faster or further than you have. Wherever you find yourself, whatever your path is, where you want to be. And that's that introspective piece of it, right? What do you want to do? Where do you want to go? You have to kind of understand that. And if it's not that, what skill do you want to improve? Because not just career progression, and for those that might not want to progress in a career upward, but they want to be a subject matter expert in their given role, it works there as well, because there's always going to be someone better. always. And what you need to do is identify who those people are, and then you start to engage with them and start asking hey, you're in this industry, I'm in this industry, I see, and then the compliment comes out. So you have that shared commonality, but then the compliment. It's not just a cold call. You actually have identified something that's relevant, that you admire, that they are able to accomplish, and then the ask that you're going to ask them is going to be genuine. You're going to ask them, I'm thinking about improving, or I'm looking to improve this aspect of whatever it may be. Do you have any suggestions? And the more that you put yourself out there, and it's almost like job hunting in a way, but you will find those individuals who are looking for mentees, right? And then, so if you're a mentee looking for a mentor, there's going to be your match out there. And it definitely has become a lot easier. It used to only be that you would have to go to conferences to do this type of engagement, right? But now on LinkedIn, we're so much easily connected that you can specifically, if you see someone at a networking event and you connect with them on LinkedIn and you're following them, you like their content, those are the individuals who are actively putting out kind of like a now hiring sign, or a looking for mentees and mentor sign, if you will, on LinkedIn. Engage with those individuals.
Right. I love that. And the timing is amazing, because literally yesterday I got an email from someone who I have so much respect for. I mean, I consider this person top of their game, and they scripted an email almost verbatim to what you just said. And they said, I know what you've done in this area. I would really like to learn from you. Are you open to taking me on as a mentee? And it was so clear. And I mean, talk about being flattered. And it's a really direct way. I think sometimes we're not as direct when we look for a mentor or a mentee. So the power of mentorship, everybody in this session should be looking for mentors, but also looking for people that they can guide, because you might not think you're far along, but you've learned things that somebody maybe coming out of the military or coming into their first job, or trying to make a career transition, they're struggling with, and they could benefit from what you've learned.
Absolutely. And the benefit of it may not be apparent for years. And we have to be conditioned in the sense that it's a selfless act. The mentorship and the menteeship and the sponsorship, right? All of that is a selfless act. But what it inevitably does is it ripple effects. And you never know, in this small world that we live in, how it will impact you for the better. For a prime example is us on this event today would have never have happened had I had not been introduced to Vets Indexes through a networking event that I had with someone else, who led me to that event, which led me to meeting you, which led to this. And you would have never known that from the very beginning portion of it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then you stalked me, and no, I'm kidding.
Just like stalking.
No, but you have something to say, and that's what these LinkedIn Lives are all about.
Yeah.
To wrap it up before we get to questions, I wanted to talk a little bit, and you've touched on this in a few of your responses, but let's just have the conversation around, how do you figure out your people? How do you get to know the people that you are supposed to serve, lead, build influence with, whether they're in your community, in your job? How do you get to know your people?
Wow. I would say that if you're actively listening, and I mean listening to the small nuances of cues, and reading not just what they're saying, but what their body language is saying. The NLP side of it, when you're saying certain things and they're responding in a certain way, that's when you're truly listening, right? And once you are doing that enough, then you get to know someone. Knowing someone doesn't happen immediate, in my experience, right? And it takes time. People are onions, to quote Shrek. you gotta get through the layers. But when you're doing that, in that process, you actually learn more about yourself sometimes than even the individual, because an opinion or a thought or a stance that you might have had on something may change or alter in a specific way based on that exploration that you're doing. So it's a continuous growth process. And when you're trying to find out who your people are, Because sometimes, depending on where you are in your evolution, right, of self-knowledge, you might not know who you are. The more people you talk to, the more people you get to know, and the more walks of life that you get to vicariously live by having these conversations will help you to understand for yourself who you are as a person, what resonates with you, what are your core values, your core principles, and what are you trying to do in this world with the time that you have.
I love that. What a great way to wrap that part of our program up. If you've followed me before, you know that I always want to add some action items. Bobby and I have covered a lot of ground here. So I know I'm going to be listening to this over because I couldn't even write fast enough with some of the things you were saying. But here were 4 takeaways that Bobby really drilled down, which I thought was really important. First, I love the idea of finding a mentor. Even if you are a mentor or you've never thought about asking somebody for that kind of guidance, reach out to someone who's farther down the path than you are and is willing to invest and learn from them. Sabrina put in the chat an article that I wrote about mentorship and the reciprocal relationship. It's a great article.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, I think, is starting today, start being intentional. Start thinking about cultivating a strong presence. Walk into the room with enthusiasm, like Bobby said. Don't be that Debbie Downer that nobody wants to sit next to. If you're going to contribute with confidence. Be intentional about who you are and how you are every single day. Number 3, define your audience, find your people, figure out who it is you were supposed to serve, and then learn about them. I love what you talk about with listening. We've got to listen. We don't have to agree, but listening builds inclusivity, which is
Absolutely.
a huge part of building influence. And number 4, find commonalities with people without losing your authenticity. Know who you are, but remain agile and flexible enough to connect with other people. One of the things I'm so proud of and so appreciative of in my network is the diversity of people that I have in my network. All different walks of life, all different religions, all different experiences and cultural backgrounds. And I really feel like that makes me better. To your point, Bobby, I feel like I know who I am. I'm still learning, but I know who I am. But I get these experiences and I love the different accents and backgrounds and stories. And it just makes me a better leader. It makes me a better person, I think.
Absolutely.
So put those questions in the chat. We're about to get to them, but I do want to give you a hint about next month's program. So in December, I'm going to be flying solo, and we're going to do an end of the year sort of a recap of what we've had in these 12, it'll be 11 LinkedIn live sessions in December. I'm going to also talk a lot about what's framing up in this next book about presence and influence, and how no matter where you are, if you want to have more influence in a meeting or a movement, what are some of the ingredients that are going to be important as we think about 2024? So you'll definitely want to follow me online, sign up for my newsletter. You'll get all the alerts about the next session in December. It's going to be a can't miss. We're even giving a little gift. So if you like presents at the holidays, you definitely want to sign up for that one. Bobby, what an amazing conversation. You and I know we can talk for hours, and we've just proven that here. Thank you so much for your time. And I know we've got some great questions, but I just want to personally thank you before we lose that as part of this conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lida. I appreciate the opportunity to have this chat with you. It's always a great time.
Well, fabulous. So Sabrina is going to pull some questions forward. Jacob, can you and Bobby discuss if there are different levels of intensity or intensities of executive presence? Would a production supervisor radiate this presence differently in front of operators they oversee versus speaking to site leadership team about recent production numbers? I will let you take that one first.
Jacob, I would say it depends on the audience, right? And you're going to find out that certain, let's say the 2 different groups respond to different tactics. What I mean by that is some may be really well guarded and not want to welcome change. And if you're talking about production numbers, for example, if it comes out as an accusatory and it's just the data is the data, but if you need to change the way that you are going to make sure that your message can get heard, you're going to have to find out what's going to resonate with that group. So yes, I think not an intensity. I would say that the message has to be catered to the audience, and that's not an intensity thing. It's more of an approach thing.
And I would just build on that to say, absolutely, if you're speaking to executive leadership versus you're speaking to somebody, downstream in your organization, you can bring different levels of candor. But if you recall, in August, we did a program about storytelling with Param, who is a special guest of mine. And one of the things we talked about is when you have to create, share information, and let's say it's bad information or it's data heavy information, wrapping it in a narrative, wrapping it in a story can also make it more consumable. And then the story can be more elevated for senior level and more mainstream or layman's terms for a different audience.
Absolutely. I will tell you that I've had executives that one liked a really good story, but the other was pure numbers. So you wouldn't give the pure numbers person the story, and you wouldn't give the story person the pure numbers. So it's finding out the audience, to your point, and that's great.
Absolutely. And good to see you, Jacob. Nice that you could join us. What's our next question? Oh, Leah, I feel like it was much easier to project executive presence in the military with a rank on my sleeve. Now that I'm retired, and she is doing great things, it feels like I am starting from scratch with establishing credibility in the civilian sector. Bobby, what would you say to that?
I think that benefit of the doubt is something that we should talk about. I think it's great, right? So when you do have rank, there is a certain benefit of the doubt that you get, that you are in command, you are in control, and that everyone knows the level of schools that you've gone through to get to that rank. So there's a bit of an assumption of credibility. Mm-hmm. But I would tell you, and I know that you've experienced this, Leah, is that you always have to approach it like you're dealing with the curmudgeon of the group, right? That hard nut to crack. And if you view it that way, your civilian career, because everyone goes on the I don't know you from a can of paint stance. You don't have that benefit of the doubt unless they know what you've gone through the crucible of your service. So I would say that you would have to view it. How did you approach that hard nut to crack person within your career? Because we can't all rely on the title of employment that we have, right? That role, we can't rely on that. So, and I know that it was likely possible that you didn't rely just solely on that rank on your sleeve. You are the sum of your parts. And if you go to the wins on what made you successful then, and you apply that to now, I think that you will see the same result.
Love that. And yeah, Leah is someone to follow. So connect with Leah because she's doing great things in the world. And thank you for your service, Leah. What's our next question? I love that one. Oh, hello, my friend. What would you say are the criteria to look out for when seeking a mentor? Let's see what you say to that.
Consistency. I would say that if you bump into someone that really genuinely wants to help, they want to help consistently. The worst thing that you could do is bump into someone that says yes today, but tomorrow falls off the radar, and then it's a one-sided conversation. So what you want to see, if you can find, is someone who is consistently giving feedback or returning responses and is active consistently. I've had the benefit of having someone who is, and I've also have learned the hard way of having someone who was not. And it seemed like it was a chore to that mentor. And with that, I would say my guidance would be to find someone who's consistently interactive.
I would add to set expectations at the outset too. As someone who works as an executive coach, one of the challenges is people want to get mentorship instead of paying for coaching. And I get that. I would too. But that's a misalignment of expectation if you say you want mentorship, but what you actually want is the services that I make a living doing. So I think setting those expectations, how much mentorship, what is your goal? Am I the right person to help you with that? Setting the ask really clearly. I'm looking to talk to you once a week. Well, that might not fit my schedule. I'm looking to talk when I need help with something. okay, maybe that does fit. So setting the expectations, letting them know what your goal is. And to your point, what you talked about earlier, what is the specific ask?
Right.
This person that reached out to me yesterday had a specific place they're looking to level up their skills in their business, and it's something I've excelled at. And that's where this person said, I've seen what you've done. I would love to get mentorship in that. And I was
Right.
like, cool, that I could help you with. So I think setting those expectations, and then with what you said, I think that's a great way to find a mentor.
That's well
Absolutely.
said, Lida.
Thank you. It means having both are important, a mentor and a sponsor. Oh, okay. So building off of the difference you said, do you believe it's important to have both mentors and sponsors?
Yes,
Okay.
I do. I think that, and it's going to, you're going to have more than one, right? Let's be clear. You're going to have more than one mentor, and you should, and you're going to have more than one sponsor, and you should. And it will come organically if you're, and this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. If you're value added, and you're searching for these connections, right, in your journey, you're going to bump into individuals that automatically start to sponsor you for different things, and make sure that you are appreciative, obviously genuinely appreciative of that, and then pay it forward when you get to that ability. But those mentors, there might be a dual role person sometimes, and I don't want it to seem that we're compartmentalizing it. Sometimes a mentor later on becomes a sponsor, and vice versa, because it's based on the act that they're providing that the title derives, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. Got it. That's really helpful to clarify. Sabrina, do we have any more questions? Brittany, I started from scratch in a new industry and suffer greatly from imposter syndrome and chaotic leadership. Do you have any recommendations for overcoming imposter syndrome and how to navigate a job title and leadership that has no direction? Interesting.
Brittany, I love this question. So imposter syndrome, and I would challenge everyone to do this with imposter syndrome, right? Because imposter syndrome is when your competence is higher than your confidence. You can do the job. You're in the job. You got the job. So you can definitely do the job. But what's lacking is your confidence in your ability to do said job, or that you belong doing said job. And what you have to remind yourself is that you're at the place that you are not by chance, right? This is a hyper competitive job market that we are in. So if you weren't the person, you wouldn't be where you are, right? On some level, I'm sure that there's growth. Everyone has improvements, and they should improve. But you should celebrate your wins and celebrate what has gotten you to the place that you are. And when you own that portion of it, the chaotic leadership thing becomes more so a managing upward challenge. So it's definitely two different things. If you're not getting professional development from your leadership, and the organizational health isn't really banging on all cylinders to provide you the opportunity to advance and grow, that's when that self-ownership, that self-accountability portion takes hold, and you take the reins on your own career. And a lot of that is reminding yourself to overcome that imposter syndrome, that you are where you are because you are consistent and you're bringing what you need to bring day in, day out as a high performer. And those are the things that will guide you forward. And now with the chaotic leadership piece and the managing upward portion of that, is that if you are not in a accountability friendly environment, right? Because not everywhere is, and radical candor is not in each organizational. Sometimes it's ruinous empathy, and sometimes it's horrible, right, and toxic, right? So there are those places out there. But when you are managing it and you're having that candid conversations on what you want out of an organization and what you bring to the table for the organization, sometimes it's a calming energy to that chaos. And sometimes it identifies that you need to make a move.
Yeah. I would also add, Brittany, whenever I've worked with someone who's had imposter syndrome, almost the worst thing you can do is try to ignore it, right? Try to just, discount it, shove it down, talk to someone about it. And not because you need an attaboy or a pat on the back or, but just really get clear on where it's coming from. Is it like Bobby was saying, is your confidence lacking? Are you in the wrong environment? But really look at it from a feelings base too, because those are emotions that will start to erode other aspects of your professional development. And it's just not worth it. Sometimes you can actually logic your way out of it, right? You can look at your kudos, you can look at all your accomplishments and go, okay, what am I kidding? Of course I have the confidence to do this. But talk to someone about it. Don't just sit and suffer in silence. That's never a good idea. So I know we're running out of time. Bobby, was there anything you didn't address that you want to leave our group with today?
No, this was a great discussion, and thank you for the platform, right? I hope everyone took away something that's beneficial.
Well, definitely connect with Bobby online. He has said that's he's open to that. Follow me, subscribe to my newsletter. We're going to talk a lot about what's coming up in December. And I really thank you, Bobby. It was so fortuitous that we got to meet back in April in New York. And now we've had this conversation, and I'm sure there are many more to come. And to all of you, I hope you stay healthy and safe. And I hope to see you all in December. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.